Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are today. I'm so thrilled that you have joined us for this conversation. Today, we are going to be talking about thriving, and I'm excited to bring to you today three colleagues to talk about their experience and their work and their research in thriving. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Megan Pollock, but I just go by Megan, and my company is called Engineer Inclusion. And so this is the first free What Is topic panel that we have for the year. And so if this is the first event that you've attended, welcome. The purpose of these talks is really to focus on bringing clarity, bringing some humanity and strategies, most importantly strategies, to a particular topic. And so we've got a variety of topics that have happened over the last few months. I started this past fall. So we started with what is accent bias. We had a rich conversation on what is workplace bullying. We talked about what is the future of work and what is non-binary. And again, all of these are strategy based. And so you can learn more about the series on my website. But what brings us together today is to talk about thriving. And so you probably found your way to this specific page. And so I am going to email all of you after this, but if you hear any ideas or strategies, my goal is to capture them all on this webpage. And so while you're most welcome to take notes, we want to try to curate all of them there, and we're going to give you an opportunity to share your ideas and strategies with us too. And so I want to introduce the panelists and introduce our topic for today. And so first we have Dr. Juliana Guslin. She is excuse me as I get back to the right screen here. She is a colleague of mine from Purdue University. We're both graduates of the engineering education program there. And this conversation was really a product of our conversation. She and I were talking about how do we bring her work and elevate her work. And in that conversation, she said, hey, I've got some other colleagues that I met at a conference. And so that's how she brought Dr. Oren Davis and Lisa Sansom to us. And so I'm going to give each of my panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so as you introduce yourself to us and to the audience and to future listeners, tell us a little bit about who you are and how your work centers around thriving. So let's start with Juliana.
Thank you, Megan. I'm Dr. Juliana Guslin. I go by Juliana. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow in the mechanical engineering department at the University of New Hampshire. And 7 years ago, I started investigating this idea of thriving in engineering with the thought that truly diverse and inclusive environments stem from an appreciation of individual differences, rather than how can we fix what's not working. So since then, I have developed a definition and model for understanding thriving in this unique context, culture, and population of undergraduate engineering students. And since engineers are people too, I'm thrilled to be here with two experts in human thriving who research, teach, consult, and speak about thriving across multiple fields of study, cultures, and stages of life. I'm looking forward to hearing some insights from Dr. Oren Davis and Lisa Sansom. I'll transition from there.
Thanks so much. All right, Oren.
Howdy, all. Dr. Oren Davis, and those who can pronounce it, call me Oren. People can call me Dr. Davis if they can't pronounce my first name. It's all good. I'm a research scientist in flow and quality of life, creativity, a bunch of other areas as well. And I run the Quality of Life Laboratory. I'm also an HR consultant and a university professor, so I work with a bunch of different organizations. And a lot of my work is looking at how creativity, flow, diversity, equity, inclusion, human capital all relate to thriving and personal well-being, all in the line of self-actualization. And so I would say that the main thing that I work on is how people do and be their best, framed in self-actualization and self-transcendence. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Oren. And Lisa.
Hello, everybody. It is great to meet you all virtually. My name is Lisa Sansom, not a doctor yet, but in the process. I am doing doctorate studies in business administration. My first career was as a high school teacher, and then I went on to get my MBA. So I took that educational background into the business world and started working in the fields of organizational development, change management, and leadership development. Then got my executive coaching and leadership coaching credentials. So I have been an executive and leadership coach for about 15 years, and then went and did a master's and other masters of applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. Graduated from that in 2010. So, for the past dozen years or so, my field has really been around bringing positive psychology into systemic and individual interventions in the workplace. Where this helps with thriving is I love working with leaders, and leaders are a very general term for me. They don't necessarily have a leadership box in an org chart, but somebody who is trying to make the world better for other people, somebody who is trying to lead an idea or a project, and they want to have a better impact on the people around them. I do coaching with people like that. And then sometimes there are also interventions that go beyond just an individual. So you've probably heard about things like resilience, and individual resilience is great, but I also help organizations build their collective resilience so that people can collectively thrive and flourish in those environments, notably in the workplace. But with coaching, we get into a whole bunch of different areas. So that is a little bit about me.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks to all of you. Now, I've activated a Slido poll. If you're new to Slido, I invite you to give it a try. If you have a smartphone, it works really well from there. So just swipe open your camera, hover it over the QR code. It's going to be the same QR code that we're going to use throughout the hour. And so just as a warm up, I give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and share with us why you chose to attend today as we kind of set up our conversation. And so how we're going to scaffold our conversation today is I've got some big questions that I'm going to offer to my panelists. And those same questions are going to be here on the screen for you to participate. And we encourage you to share your ideas. All of us are looking at what you're contributing, and we're going to draw from that as we're talking about our own experience and work in these different kinds of fields. And so again, this is a good tool to practice. Now, if you want to go to the browser, you can go to slido.com, enter in that number 8762777. But if it is still problematic, just type in the chat. I've got the chat going and I'll see what you type there, and then we'll also pull it into the conversation. So however it makes sense for you to contribute, we hope that you will. We want this to be an interactive conversation. And so I applaud the first person who contributed there, that you chose to attend today to fight your overwork demons. I love that. I feel like I probably share some of those similar demons. And so looking forward to talking with our speakers about that today. And so again, if you have resources, I encourage you to share those in the chat. I will curate all of those on the webpage afterwards, and then I'll email you to make sure that you have that and the recording of today's conversation. Welcome, Chris. Glad to have you here from Canada, and we hope that you will absolutely leave with some strategies today. So I'm going to leave this up because I was a little bit delinquent in getting it loaded. I see some people are typing here at the top, and I'm going to start off our conversation today with the broad question of what is thriving? So what is thriving? And I'm going to invite Lisa to start us off. So what is thriving, and why is thriving important?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know my co-panelists are going to have many, many ideas on this. When I think about thriving, the first thing that comes to mind is there might be some academic definition of it out there. But I think for most people, you know when you are thriving, and it's very different for each individual. And so thriving might be performing at your strengths. Thriving might be thriving in your different relationships. It might be engaging in meaningful work for you. But it really is that notion of, being at your peak wellness, however you define that for you. And it's useful in a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, first of all, it just feels great. It feels great to be thriving. And we know there are a number of outcomes that are beneficial that come from thriving, such as having great relationships, such as doing well in life, having that sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And when you are thriving, when your bucket is full, so so to speak, that also means that you can help other people with their thriving and with their well-being. So there's a number of good correlates that go along with thriving, and a lot of reasons that people would want to engage in it. I would say for people who are in engineering specifically, and if you're working in higher education, you probably have some sort of mission or mandate for yourself where you want to do better and be better yourself so that you can help others. And thriving is certainly going to help you get there.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Oren, what is thriving to you and why is it important?
I'm going to say that thriving is living the life you want to live in the way that you want to live it. And I'd say more than anything else, it's being able to have your own terms and being able to live your life on your own terms in ways that actually benefit you and serve you, but also serve other people in the ways that are meaningful to you. And I think that that's really the foundation of fulfilling our potential, engaging in self-actualization, then going beyond the fulfillment of our potential to creating a lasting mark and leaving a legacy.
Thanks. And then Juliana.
Absolutely. I stand by 100% everything Lisa and Oren said. This is hard to follow. But in addition to thinking about thriving as this optimally functioning, continuously growing, context-specific, living life on our own terms process, I also ground what I think about what about thriving into engineering, which for me is a process to facilitate the environments for students and myself and everyone in the system to develop optimal functioning in undergraduate engineering programs. So I think for me, just given that academic definition and where I sit, I tend to ground it more in terms of thriving in specific culture, context, and environments, because I think it is different. Thriving looks different in relationships versus at work versus at school. And then one more thing I want to mention is why thriving is important. There was one point in my life when I got very, very sick in my early 20s. And I thought, well, if I pass away now, what matters? And when I think about what really mattered in my life up until, my wise and ripe 20-something years of age, it was the moments where I was thriving, that I was holding dear to my heart. I didn't care about being cut off in traffic anymore. I didn't care about, I didn't get that fellowship or scholarship. But it was the moments where, despite all the inconveniences and the ups and downs of life, where were the moments where I felt like I had the greatest sense of meaning and purpose and peak wellness, and I was living my best life? And that's why I think about thriving continually in what I do and how I live, and why it's very important for me, at least.
Thanks. So I have the question here on the Slido, and I encourage you all participants to share with us, like, what is thriving to you? Now, I want to ask a clarifying question. So Juliana and we both share that we're both engineers. And so I saw someone in the earlier question say sort of the overwork demons. So I'm curious, how do we separate thriving from striving? Because I think that there could often be a confusion because Juliana mentioned optimal functioning. So that to me means productivity, that means getting shit done, that means all of those sort of striving things that have been so deeply ingrained in me with this sort of, puritanic work ethic. So how do we detether those things for those of us who are like, I want to thrive so that I can strive?
I can start if the rest of us is okay with that. Based on the question, I'm understanding what's the difference between striving and thriving, right? For the work context, I think of striving as I don't like where I am right now in some way, and I want it to be different. I am striving for something else. Versus I think of thriving as, okay, sure, my life isn't perfect right now, but I really find a great sense of meaning and purpose, and I'm functioning really well, given what is the reality of what is in this moment. So for me, that's a nuance that I like to think about. If I notice I hate everything about my life right now and everything feels dead wrong and I'm trying to change every little thing and I'm miserable along the way, then that's the striving piece. And how can I loop myself back to thriving is recognizing that this experience, like everything else, is going to change. And the best that I can do right now is to be with myself, accept the situation as it is, and make the best possible decisions from here without wasting all of that extra energy on worry, stress, anxiety, and depression, which will not directly benefit my ability to make the best decisions.
Yeah, thanks. So I certainly don't think striving means I'm unhappy, right? Like here we are at the beginning of the year. I have created my like little list of like my goals, my word of the year, and I have literally taped these all over my house. So I'm striving towards big goals. So it doesn't mean I'm unhappy. It means that I'm reaching. And I think a lot of us and our students, for those of you who are working with students, have students who've been deeply conditioned to be working towards something. And we have in our minds that striving equals thriving when we're succeeding. So Oren, you had unmuted a moment ago. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I'm going to actually start with my mentor's old joke. When I was a Chick-fil-A High's grad student, there was a question about, what exactly does upward striving mean? And Chick-fil-A High, without missing a beat, said it means you want to use the elevator. And the point of that, and I like that joke because it's got actually a couple of layers to it. And one of them is when we're striving, it means that there's a part of us that actually does want to just go the simple way that's out there. And then we have to decide, is it good for us to go the simple way? Or is it good for us to put in the effort? And so like so many things, like stress, like many other things, there's positive striving that's actually doing something for us. When we put in the effort, I hate to put it this way, but sometimes we enjoy the worry. We actually enjoy the stress. We actually get something out of it. And I've heard some people say like it makes them feel alive, like there's something to go for. There's a reason to keep moving, and it's not always going to be easy. But the thing is, just like stress, is this eustress or distress? Is this actually like stress that's pushing us and motivating us, or is this stress that's hindering us and holding us back? Same thing for our striving. Whenever we're striving, we might probably want the easy way out. Now, the question is it a good idea to just hit the button and take the elevator to the top, or do we need the exercise of climbing the stairs? And I think that's when it comes to striving versus thriving, we have to ask, do we really need to use the elevator, or do we really want to take the stairs? And like, yes, we're always going to want the easy way out. That's efficient, but not always the best for us. So, and I think that when we have the freedom to choose when we strive and when we don't, that I think maximizes things.
If I can add on to what Oren just said, I think the other fun thing about the analogy that Oren is using is it's also okay to take the stairs for a few flights and then decide you want to take the elevator, because the elevator stops at all floors. And I also love what Oren put out there about that stress curve, and that there is an optimal amount of stress, and it differs for each person and each day, depending on your energy level and the task and all these sorts of things. It takes you to that optimal peak performance in that time. And striving and thriving can absolutely coexist. I think part of the fun in this, the experimentation, is in choosing where you want to strive, what it's getting you ultimately, and being able to step back occasionally, like Megan, it sounds like you do at the beginning of the year, to say, okay, where is my focus right now? And how has that been working for me in the past? And what am I choicefully deciding to bring forward as my focus, where I want to strive, where I want to expend that time and energy, especially that energy? And where is it that I'm perfectly fine with elevators or even just staying on the ground floor for now? This is really not the time for me to be doing these things in this moment.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. You gave me some validation there that the other two weren't giving to me, so thank you. Feeling okay with being a striver. So I put in the chat, Oren, based on what you were saying, is that I recently reread this article from the Harvard Business Review about stress and how it can be a good thing if we know how to use it. And I'll also add another resource in the chat. I just started this book this morning called Tranquility by Tuesday, 9 Ways to Calm the Chaos and Make Time for What Matters. And I thought of that by the comment here on the screen, can thriving include rest? And I want to believe that yes, it should, right? If Juliana is talking about our sort of optimal functioning requires our bodies to have rest. And so yes, I think the answer to that is certainly yes.
I'm actually just going to add a little more to that and say that like one of the most interesting things about maturity and flourishing and positive development is that we need to have the ability to embrace both sides of the extremes fully. That is, we really do need to be able to know how to put our heads down, nose to the grindstone, work like there's no tomorrow, but we also need to learn and be able to, turn everything off and rest, because we need to be ready for another tomorrow. So it's like, as we grow and develop, we need to be able to grasp both things fully. And it's really about having enough control over your energy to be able to say, in this moment, I'm going to work, very, very hard because I need to. And in this moment, I'm going to rest very, very hard because this is what I choose to do, or this is what I need to do. And, speaking as a bit of a workaholic, those of us who can't do both, right, that means we have some growing to do. And when we realize that we're struggling with putting things aside and resting, that becomes a growth point for us.
And I would add that rest should also be something that renews you, because there are things that we think are going to be restful or that the world tells us are going to be restful, and you might not actually get your energy back as a result of taking a bubble bath or watching a movie on Netflix or whatever it is. So again, to that individualized piece, know what is your rest and your renewal, and it might look different for you than it looks for other people.
I'm adding another link in a chat to a book. I finished it this morning on my walk, called The 6 Habits of Growth by Brendan Burchard. And one of his 6 habits is energy management. And that's really in line with what Oren and Lisa were saying. So in a little bit different strategy for our conversation today, usually I give we talk about the definition, and then we talk about the barriers, but I wanted to sort of flip it on its head a little bit. So we're going to talk first about what are the best strategies for helping ourselves thrive. Then the next prompt is going to be, what are the barriers to thriving? And so I want to sort of start with something positive. Those good news. What are the actionable strategies that we can employ, that we can think about? And then I want us to be really realistic about the barriers that people face, whether that's based on their mental health, whether that's based on their marginalized identity. And then from there, we're going to talk about how do we then use some of these strategies that we're going to talk about now to help others overcome those barriers. All right. So now I want to offer this to the group. And so, Oren, let's start with you for this one. What are the best strategies for helping ourselves thrive?
I'm going to say that the one that I'm the biggest fan of is the rather simple and yet very, very detailed temet noske, which basically means know thyself. This is the maxim of the Oracle at Delphi, is you have to know who you are. And I find over and over again that people who aren't thriving also don't know themselves very well, and they don't necessarily take the time to do that. And let's be honest with one another. Looking in the mirror, taking that deep, long, hard look in the mirror, that is scary, because we've all got aspects of ourselves that we don't like. We have aspects of ourselves that concern us. We have aspects of ourselves that downright scare us. And and this is right along with the aspects of ourselves that we totally admire, respect, love. And you know what? No matter how much imposter syndrome you may have, you have aspects of yourself that you love and admire and respect about yourself. So, we have all of those things. But to actually get in there and categorize those things, to understand those things and recognize how they interact within us, that's going to be the first step. And to me, although it's necessary but not sufficient, it's necessary, sine qua non. It is that without which there is no thriving until you know who you are, what you're about. The light side of your force, the dark side of your force, and you also understand how they interact. And by the way, something to keep in mind is that sometimes the light side of our force is actually something that can hold us back. And sometimes the dark side of our force is actually something that is seriously driving us, albeit in both cases in slightly twisted ways. So getting that understanding our own complexities, how they work, how they drive us, and what kind of life we want. I said before that thriving is living the life you want in the way that you want to live it. But you can't live the life you want or know the way that you want to live it without knowing yourself first. So I would say you absolutely have to start there and move forward.
Yeah, thanks so much, Oren. Before we move to the other panelists, I want to get you to kind of dig in a little bit. So from your work in research, how do you encourage people to get to know themselves?
Sure. So the first thing is, I think there are many tools out there that we can go with. I mean, things like, let's say, the VIA Strength Survey, I would say, there are various personality tests. Take most of them with a grain of salt. But they're there as sort of, a like, okay, well, start here if you don't know where else to start. But try and find, good ones like the Big Five or something like that. Stay away from things like, Myers-Briggs and other assorted nonsense like that. Stay close to the ones that actually have some research behind them. So VIA Strengths, Big Five, and let's say, for example, the positive well-being scale, other aspects of flourishing. And again, for each of those things, you can look at your abilities, you can look at your relationships, and each of those things are places to start. But also, as we get to know ourselves, we look at our strengths, our talents, things we like about ourselves, things we don't like about ourselves. And sometimes people are too scared to even go for those steps. And so what I tell them is their first step, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but go with me anyway on this. Start with, what's your favorite color? Or, what do you like to eat? What don't you like to eat? Like, take a look at, people have been doing these raps on the various apps that they use. What does that say about you? What kind of songs do you like? What's on your playlist? If you watch television, what's on your show list? Like, just take a look at those preferences that you have. Those aren't so scary most of the time, and we can look at those. Our favorite things, our little preferences, and those quotidian preferences, because that's a beginning, and those give us insights about ourselves. Like, what is there any pattern to the foods we like? Is there any pattern to the music that we listen to, or the shows that we watch, or the books that we read, or the colors we like, or the artists that we enjoy? Are you a Rembrandt person? Are you more of a Chagall person? Are you more of a Picasso person? Escher, whatever. What does it say about you, and what do you think it says about you? And in any case, that's a start. And from there, you can go to deeper and deeper levels of exploration. And sometimes it's worthwhile to have a partner or coach, or to meet with friends and have them do that. Things like the reflected best self exercise, which is often a very humbling experience, as people around you tell you what's really awesome about you. But things like that are often very helpful. So I think that's where I'd start.
All right. So I have some resources that I'm going to share after this. So I have an exercise on values, of understanding what are my personal values. That's a good place to start as well. I also have a worksheet on crafting vision, mission, and value statements, personal statements. That's another way to kind of get to know yourself. And another tool that I use, because I'm an engineer, is I actually do root cause analyses on myself. I did one this morning. I did a fishbone analysis on myself this morning. And that's to help me get to know. So it's basically asking the 5 whys. Why is this? Why is this? Why is this? Why is this? And so I'll share some of those resources on my website. So let's get back to the broader question here around best strategies for helping ourselves thrive. So let's see, Juliana?
Sure. And I was thinking now about, how do we know thyself as well? Because if we're going to help ourselves thrive, it is important to first know thyself. And I appreciate everything Oren said. Building off of that, I want to quote Voltaire, this idea that common sense is not so common. And I want to illustrate this by having anyone who wants to join, just fold your arms, just cross your arms like this for a second. And notice how that feels. I've done this a 1,000 times, probably more in my lifetime. Now let's cross our arms the other way. And now notice how that feels. And for me, this is so much more awkward to cross my arms the other way, just because I'm not used to it. And similarly, there's this idea that in my head, I know rest is good for me. It's important to work hard, but also rest hard. But then it's 4 a.m. in the morning and I'm still on my phone. So this idea that just because I know this is what I want to do in my life, this is what I want to accomplish, this is what I want to strive for, it doesn't actually mean that is what will happen. Where the hard work and the thriving comes together is recognizing that every step I take when I strive for something else, and when I change the behaviors and change my thought patterns or anything that I want to do to become a more optimal functioning version of myself, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be like crossing my arms the other way. And that's a small thing. But can you imagine something like that for a bigger change in life? It's going to feel like I'm starting to walk for the first time again, and that's okay. And one of the best strategies that I tell myself when I'm learning to thrive and changing something about my life is recognizing that there is a certain discomfort that comes along the process. That thriving isn't always going to feel like I'm floating on the clouds and there are no problems in my life, but rather recognizing that there's a good stress, there's a bad stress, right? But there's also a good discomfort, like I am growing. After a good workout, my muscles are going to be sore. And there's a bad pain, like I am completely broken down. So recognizing where that threshold is for positive discomfort, to strive for something and work vigorously without feeling broken down, without feeling like if I don't meet my goals, if I don't get what I want, or if something unexpected happens that I don't want to happen, that I'll just be completely crushed and miserable from that. But rather recognizing that one of the best strategies we can help ourselves thrive is to coexist with the pain or the discomfort of change, and then using that discomfort to motivate further changes.
I really like that, Juliana. So we've got first, know thyself, and two, sort of learning to be comfortable with discomfort. A book I read a couple of months ago, it was called Good Inside by Becky Kennedy. And one of the biggest takeaways I had from that book is she said, learning to hold two truths. So one truth might be, I am thriving and I'm uncomfortable. So those can both be true at the same time. I am thriving and I am striving and I'm struggling. So learning to accept that two truths can be held at the same time. It's a parenting book, but if you're interested, I think it's a really good tool for classroom management and understanding the people that we serve. I think it's a good book for life. And so now we've got know thyself, positive discomfort, sort of holding two truths. And Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to add in a whole bunch of things in there. There's one book I'm going to put into the chat. I don't know how to do the little short forms that you have in there so beautifully, Megan, but a lot of what our brain tells us we should be doing is just wrong. It doesn't work in today's society very well. So, for example, getting drawn towards rest when there's so much light and activity in our environment is really hard because we want to stay connected with people. Getting drawn towards healthy food is really hard when there's so much salty, sweet stuff out there that our body also craves. There's so many different things that we know are good for ourselves. And so we know that just knowing and being educated about it isn't enough. When I am working with individual coaching clients, quite often, like we've been talking about, I just go right back to basics. How is your sleep? How is your movement? How is your connection with nature? How are your relationships with other people? How are the things going that are most important to you foundationally in life? So it could be your values, it could be your strengths, it could be your meaning and purpose. If those foundational pieces are shaky, then it's going to be really hard for you to thrive. And pick one thing. Just work on one thing. Now, I'm the parent of two boys who are now off at university, but a long time ago, when they were getting older, through their kind of teen years, their bedtime naturally got later, and that meant that my bedtime got later. And they were able to manage on that, but I was not. And so I drew a very strong line and said, okay, like I'm done at 9:30. I am off of parenting duty. I'm not doing that anymore unless somebody is like lost a limb or severely bleeding, because I need to be in bed by 10:30. And I took that year, I enlisted the support of my family, and I said, I am prioritizing my sleep. And since that time, that's been about 8-ish years now, sleep has been really important to me. And that was a habit that I cultivated and developed for my own well-being. And I was just a better person when I had slept well. So once I got that down, then the next thing I looked at is what am I eating? And then when I got that down, the next thing I took a look at is how am I doing with my outdoors time? And then I got that down and I said, how am I doing with my relationships? And so once I had developed a certain habit that was helping helping me feel like I was being a better person so I could contribute more to the world in the ways that I wanted to. That was helping my thriving. And then I would tackle the next thing. If you tackle everything all at once, you're probably setting yourself up for failure and for discouragement and for a lack of thriving. And then the inner critic starts beating up on yourself, and it can just get really messy in there. So, yes, know yourself. Yes, embrace the and of those dichotomies and those paradoxes. I mean, human beings are amazing. We can think in contradictions, we can feel in contradictions, and it's kind of a neat place to sit in the middle of that messy Venn diagram and take a look at what is the one thing that you have control over that you would be able to start making some baby steps towards your own thriving, and see who it is that you might want to work with to help you get to more of that thriving for yourself so that there is some accountability. Mark your progress. There's all sorts of great resources on how that progress motivates. The Progress Principle, for example, by Teresa Amabile and Stephen Kramer, I think, if someone wants to throw that into the chat box. Really great resources out there on just how to make progress, how to celebrate progress, how to motivate yourself to make those changes, and how to work with other people to do that. Thanks, Oren. That's great. And yes, to these other great resources that are coming in. Atomic Habits is fantastic. For a while, it seemed like there were a lot of books being written about habit formation. And I would say, I'm curious in Juliana and Oren's takes on this. I would say I've seen the weight of conversation move away from goals and more towards habits and routines. And I think that's really useful for people to consider, especially those who might have this idea. And I'm thinking, engineers might be really good at this, like set a goal, achieve it, set a goal, achieve it, set a goal, achieve it. And when it comes to thriving, that may not be the best approach. It may be more about creating habits, and it may be more about temptation bundling, for example, and creating those tiny little habits and habit stacking and some of those little things that are incremental, because I know we're going to get to barriers. One of the big barriers that I often hear is, I don't have time. But really, some of these things do not take very long to implement. And when you've got the support of other people around you and you're able to change your system to conspire for your thriving, you can make some tremendous progress by doing very little things.
Yeah, I appreciate that connection to thinking about systems. When we were talking about, as we lead into the next question around barriers, that we have to think about the big systems, not only our own personalized systems of how we function and operate and how we track habits, but we want to begin to think about how has the big system, how does that create barriers that other people may face that we may not face, and how do we begin to recognize those? Before we jump to that, I want to acknowledge we had a couple of people contribute here on the screen that practicing self-compassion and loving ourselves as we are and limiting needless comparisons. And so again, each of these ideas and strategies are practices. I like the word that the person used here, practicing self-compassion. They are habits. It is a habit to learn how to engage ourselves in self-compassion. It is a habit to love ourselves and to not needlessly compare. And so those are things and strategies that we can employ. Another tool that I really like is sort of mindfulness mantras. If we want to sort of rewire the way that our brains sort of function and make decisions around different kinds of mindsets, we can use different kinds of mantras to help us focus our energies on different kinds of things. There's an app that I like called, it's just automatic on my phone, so I'm not going to remember the name of it, but I'll find the name of the app. But I like it because I can set up all the different kinds of things and I can kind of scroll through them, and like I can do breathing with it. And it helps me really kind of center my language and my head to continue to thrive. So now let's talk about some of the barriers to thriving. So let me just open this up to the panel. What are some of the barriers that you see in your practice as practitioners in this work that people face?
Well, since I opened that Pandora's box, maybe I'll just start with the biggest one that I hear is I don't have time. I have so many other things that I need to be doing. I have so many other obligations and responsibilities, my studies, my work, my commitments, my everything else. And people are giving so much to other people that they're not taking the time for their own thriving. And they might feel that their own thriving feels selfish. Like, who am I to take an afternoon off? Who am I to take an extra hour of sleep? Who am I to go out for a hike in the mountains when I know that that's really good for me? It's a big barrier that I hear from a lot of people. I mean, we can talk about how to address it too, but maybe others want to share other barriers that they've been
Yeah,
hearing.
let's move on to talk about some other barriers that you and your clients are facing.
One barrier I often hear is that I don't have the privilege to thrive. I have big problems in my life. I'm going through hardships, and I once I have, or if I ever have, a problem-free life, then I will thrive. And I want to recognize that as a barrier because can someone post in the chat if they would never have any problems in life right now? I think that would be a pretty boring life. And I think thriving comes from our ability to navigate the hardships that happen. And instead of saying thriving happens when there are no problems at all.
So I suppose this is going to be a little controversial, but that's never stopped me before. I'm going to say that the biggest barrier to thriving is we don't want to. It is shocking to me as a positive psychologist just how many people don't want to thrive. They look at the mess of their lives, they're used to it, and they're so used to it that the idea of something better actually sounds worse, or the mountain in front of them to climb just sounds like the cure is worse than the disease. And over again, I talk to folks and I find that that's the way that they look at thriving. The cure is worse than the disease, and what it would take me to get there isn't worth it. Or, what, and that may mean that they don't really understand the benefits. Often they don't understand themselves, which is usually the first thing I've got to, get them to do is understand themselves, and then they're able to think about thriving in a different way. But so many people are actually very interested in not thriving. And, something that I think a number of people have been talking about recently, Jonathan Haidt, among others, is that some people actually gain a lot from having, let's say, a victim mentality, seeing themselves as the dumping grounds for other people, or seeing themselves as punching bags, and they're used to it and they're familiar with it. And in some cases, they start to develop the idea that they maybe deserve it, or any number of other things. Not to mention that the way that we've been approaching victimization and victimhood in these days has been almost adding a level to it that sometimes makes people want to go for it. And we've been seeing this in some very bizarre ways, that people are actually striving for victimhood, for lack of a better term. And people are trying to, so to speak, thrive on their weaknesses, in part because we're trying to become better as human beings, to respect the challenges that people go through. So some people are looking for challenges as a way to gain respect or compassion from other people because they can't get it any other way. But that also means that they don't want to thrive. They're just looking for certain, hits. And I mean, that is a very sorry thing to see. And so, as practitioners in thriving, the first thing we kind of need to get people to do is recognize that, like, no, you can thrive. Thriving is good. The cure is not worse than the disease. The results are beneficial. And yes, you do want to thrive. And from this, I pull an aspect of humanistic psychology that basically, and positive psychology, which humanistic psychology underpins, that human beings, given the freedom to do so, will pursue self-actualization. It's a drive, like air, water, food, sex, any number of other things. It's a drive. And so if you see people that are not driven towards self-actualization, there's something in their way. And often that something in their way is they may not believe that it's possible, or they may not even have seen enough of it to believe or recognize that it's something that they want. But once they see it and once they're given the freedom, they will go for it like a paperclip to a magnet.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that, we've got some great comments here on the screen, but not all environments, cultures, climates are hospitable for optimal growth or thriving. I was looking at some applications for scholarships for the intentionally engineered inclusion program this morning, and somebody shared that they had just, through great courage, left a toxic work environment. And to me, that's a really important step of recognizing I am not growing. I cannot thrive in this space. This space is not designed for me. It's not supporting me. And there's an element of choice of recognizing that just because, there's the old adage of like bloom where you're planted. Well, it's deeply problematic, right? Because it encourages us to leave ourselves in sometimes abusive situations, abusive relationships, abusive environments. And so recognizing how to thrive is recognizing how do we find the environments that allow us to succeed. And if you've attended any of my workshops or just panels here, I always bring up the 4 eyes of oppression. And the 4 eyes of oppression are really important for us to recognize, because depending on who we are and our identities and the level of privilege that we have in multiple spaces, it affects how we move through the world. And so there are deep ideologies that undergird so much of how we sort of function in this world. Ideologies around race, around gender, around LGBTQ, around citizenship, around learning ability, and around physical ability. All of these ideologies, they become these sort of interpersonal interactions. And these interpersonal interactions could be the small sort of microaggressive behaviors that we face in the classroom and the work environment. And then those ideologies can become institutionalized in the policies and the practices of an organization that reinforces deeply problematic barriers. And then what happens is when all of these external things come together, the ideologies, the interpersonal interactions, and the institutionalized ideas, they then create an internalized oppression around those ideas. And those can become tremendous barriers to our self-actualization, to our self-efficacy. And so the barriers that people face when we're looking at whether it's race, gender, socioeconomic status, ability or disability, or any other multiple dimension of identity, people are facing all kinds of things that we may not be able to see. And I might be able to thrive in a particular environment because it was built for me, but other people may not be able to thrive. And so what we have to do as leaders, as educators, as people who care about creating and cultivating environments for people around us to thrive, is we have to begin to recognize what are the barriers that people are facing based on these multiple levels of their identity, and how do we begin to remove those barriers and supplant them with supports. One thing I don't think that this list really articulates, it does mention trauma, but also mental health. Mental health can be a tremendous barrier to thriving as well. And when we think about mental health as it relates to sort of the mindfulness movement, I, as someone who I am openly, admit that I have struggled and continue to struggle throughout my life with depression, that when you are in a dark and scary place, it doesn't matter how many lists of things I'm grateful for that I write. It doesn't matter how many deep breaths I take. When you are experiencing depression, that can affect the way that you are thriving, right? And so we have to, as leaders, as educators, be really cognizant of the things that our people around us are facing, that there could be multiple barriers. It may not be their work ethic. It may not be their commitment to habits, that there are lots of things that can affect them. I want to point out a couple of these things. So societal expectations, that we aren't working hard enough, if we aren't struggling. The sort of toxic work environment, stressful, non-supportive academic engineering environment is also a huge barrier. It celebrates exhaustion in order to reach excellence. I remember working for Texas Instruments as an engineer, and it was a badge of honor for people to talk about how many vacation hours they built up. And to me, that's such a toxic culture of bragging about who has not taken vacation the longest. And that becomes part of that culture. And if I'm sitting here thinking I need a vacation, I need time off, but now I'm less because I'm not competing with that. Balancing our own needs, fear of change, poverty, and someone says learning management systems. So there could be technology barriers, all kinds of barriers that people are facing. So let's jump to the last set of prompts here and looking at pardon me as I skip through here. So how can we use the strategies shared and more to both overcome barriers and help others overcome those barriers? What do you think, panelists?
I think a lot of the things that we've already highlighted are really important is to know yourself, surround yourself with supportive and good people, work together. By helping other people, you're likely to help yourself as well. And keep thriving in mind. You know, like Oren said, if thriving is a true goal, recognize that some of it's going to feel uncomfortable sometimes. And you know, that whole be the change that you wish to see. If this is important to you, you know, people were talking about, yeah, normalize rest and vacation. So take your vacation. One of the things that I did many years ago in my organizational development career is I helped my employer become a great place to work, an employer of choice. And one of the things we had to fill out was how many days of vacation did your HR director take? And take your vacation, you know, stop contacting other people when they are on vacation. Just refuse to send emails after the end of the day. Like there are individual things that we can take, you know, small acts of meaningful rebellion and just start doing that and see what happens. And the likelihood is probably nothing too bad and you can help yourself and other people thrive.
Thanks, Lisa. Oren, Juliana, what do you think? How can we help others thrive?
When it comes to helping others thrive, I like to share a series of conversations I've had with various engineering students, instructors, and staff. When I was first exploring this idea of what does thriving even mean about 7 years ago, I started talking to other students. I was a student at the time too. And one of the feedback I got was, well, if my professor was a little nicer, or if I could get a little more leeway in this class and felt like it was a little better instruction, then that would be wonderful. The whole system would be great. And also, if the staff could be a little quicker or more responsive, then I will be thriving and our whole engineering system will be thriving. And then later on, once I started teaching and becoming an instructor, I would talk to the other instructors. What would it take for the whole engineering system to thrive? Engineering in an academic setting. And I heard, well, if my students were a little easier to teach, or if they paid attention or showed up to class more, that would be wonderful. Oh, and if the staff could be a little quicker, that would be great as well, because I have a lot of things I need to do that is just going through administration right now. I'm waiting for the papers and the documents. And then later on, as I'm thinking, I'm pondering more, I realize, let me talk to the staff and see how that's going. And sure enough, I hear, well, all the students and the instructors just keep sending us this endless things to do. And if we could just have them do more of their own stuff or just change a little bit, then the whole engineering academic system would be thriving, and I will too, and everything will be great. So the moral of that story and what I learned is that we tend to externalize what it takes to thrive. If only the other people in my life change a little bit, then everything will be great. And I'm sure to an extent, this can apply in families and other contexts as well. But what I like to think about and encourage in terms of how to help ourselves and other people thrive is that if we can do the strategies that Oren and Lisa and I and Megan have shared earlier today, the micro habits of change, the ways we can actually tangibly change our own ways of thinking or doing or goals or habits, then that little bit more we can offer other people. And it will show because, and I also remember there was a question about how can we support students. As an instructor, it's one thing for myself to show up to class completely stressed out with no sleep the day before and tell them, oh yeah, you should sleep well and do all these things like go out to nature and eat well, and that's good for you. But it's another thing if I can center myself before walking into the classroom after a good night's sleep, after I've had my own time in nature and I am well nourished as well. I don't even need to say these things are good for you out loud per se, but students will sense it, they will feel it, and my own person, I will be a better person as well. So the more we can individually each invest in our own thriving, then collectively that will change the cultures and the environments and the spaces that we share with other people as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to summarize what Juliana said by with a line from the airlines. Please put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. Make sure that you've got your own way to breathe and your own way to actually stay alive before you're doing that for other people. The thing I'm going to add is that I think Lisa and Juliana really covered a lot of it. I'm going to add one more thing, which is be the sounding board. We can help others thrive by being the sounding board. Often we see people in ways that they don't see themselves. And ironically, I find that more often than not, we see people for the better in ways that they don't. So funnily enough, when I'm working with students or clients, like one of the things that I ask them is, if I called up your significant other, your best friend, somebody important in your life, and I said, what is the best thing about you? What would they say? Or if I ask them, why do they have the relationship with you that they do, whether it's spouse or whatever, why do they have that? Do you think you could tell me what they'd say? And it's shocking to me how many times they can't, believe it or not. And it's like, the people that we've been with our whole lives or people we've been friends with for so long, we often don't think about like why they like us or how they see us and the many positive ways in which they can give us that information. But sometimes what we need to do is think out loud. And even in DEI, some of the work that I've done in DEI, part of what's very, very necessary is getting our erroneous ideas out there. We have to be able to say it out loud to work it through, because often we have problematic beliefs that we've never actually stopped to examine. Most of us who have grown up with some of these erroneous things, we grew up with them. They were just there. Like some of the words that I grew up using, later on, I kind of realized that somebody very gently gave me some feedback when I used a wrong word. It's like, yeah, that really doesn't mean what you think it does. It doesn't have the context that you think it has. But it was being able to get that sounding board, getting that feedback, and having the freedom to put my ideas out there without and having somebody hear me without judging me, just to say, here's what I think. And then somebody just mirrored back to me like, okay, here's what that looks like, right? And in some cases, being able to see that I may have had some ideas that were demographist in some way or another. And then I had certain beliefs that, when I looked at it, it's like, that doesn't really actually fit with my value system, but I never put this thing out there and looked at it. And we have so many behaviors and thoughts and words and deeds that don't fit our value systems, but we've never gotten the chance to explore them in a non-judgmental situation. And that's where often, coaches, therapists, they do that for us a lot. But as colleagues, as friends, we can do that for one another also. And I think that we can do a lot of things for one another and a lot of good for one another in that way. Be the sounding board, be the non-judgmental mirror that you can hold up to people, be it for other people, ask other people to be it for you, create that space where people can think aloud and analyze their thoughts, their words, their behaviors, and see if it actually fits the values that they espouse, and give them the freedom to just see it non-judgmentally and let them make their own judgments, realize, oh my God, I'm not necessarily thinking in a way that I approve of. I'm not behaving in a way that I approve of. I'm not speaking in a way that I approve of. And that's often one of the most powerful agents for change, for us to have the freedom to see it for ourselves and do it ourselves.
Thank you so much, Oren. So some of what I took away and what you all have just shared is to model thriving. If we want to help others thrive, we need to practice it ourselves. And so that also includes, to me, being vulnerable and transparent about our own efforts to learn to thrive and the practice of thriving. And so I've got here on the screen, if you have additional resources that you want to share with our community here, I will add those to the website. And I've written down a ton of different things that I will include on the website here today. As you're wrapping up your thoughts, and before we shift gears today, I do want to thank Lisa, Juliana, and Oren so much for joining me today to talk about thriving. I hope that you've been able to take something away from our conversation. I hope that if you have any additional questions, that you drop those in the chat for us, or I'm looking at the Slido. I haven't seen any questions there yet. But as you're sharing resources, I want you to also just take a moment to reflect. Reflection is a really good tool for learning to thrive, reflecting on what works, what didn't work, and what you want to do next. And so we've got a resource here on the HBR article, Manage Your Energy and Not Your Time, is useful. I'm going to leave this open, but I want to drop up another screen is to think about what's something that you learned today, what's something that you want to do differently, and then what's an action item that you want to take away from this. And so again, Lisa, Juliana, Oren, final last words.
In terms of thinking ahead in the future, I am currently working on a research study that explores engineering thriving. So if anyone is interested in being part of the frontiers of knowledge being created on this topic, please feel free to reach out. I will put my email in the chat.
I'm also encouraging people to reach out if there's anything of interest. I've put my LinkedIn into the chat. That's probably the best way to stay connected right now. And I just want to encourage everybody. You probably have had something in this session spark an idea for you, and write that down. Don't let that escape. Grab some scrap of paper or phone or tablet or something and record what it is that just came up for you, because in there's probably some sort of grain towards your thriving.
Thanks so much to each of you. So I want you to capture your one action item, and I also want to draw attention to the Intentionally Engineer Inclusion Program starts a week from yesterday. There's still time to register. You can register up through the end of next week. It's a 12-week semi-asynchronous program where you're going to get to engage with me and about 15 other amazing people who've committed to this work. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. You can learn more about it on my website. I'll send it in an email. And just hot off the presses, I haven't shared this yet. I'm going to come back to the screen, but I am doing a new program. I'm going to start a reading community. So I've picked 12 books that are on my reading list. They're also sitting here on my desk that I've already had and I need to read. And so if you're interested in joining our reading community, stay tuned for that. And then we can read and learn together. And so with that, let's go back to some of the action items that people shared. If you've got a drop off, feel free to go ahead and do that. Oops, let's see. I'm not getting any action items showing up here. So it's okay. Maybe we didn't get to have anybody contribute. Oh, email Juliana about our study. Awesome. And I'm going to include her information in our follow-up, and then she may email you as well. So with that, thank you all so much for participating. Stay tuned for next month's event, and I wish you all a wonderful, happy new year full of thriving for you and your friends and your family and your colleagues. Thank you.